The mysterious signal. The stars twinkled in the vastness of space, stretching out beyond the reach of any known civilization. It was the perfect time for exploration. High above a distant planet, a massive alien fleet hovered. They were the Xalor, a race of highly advanced beings with technology that far surpassed anything humanity could dream of. They had seen many wonders across the galaxy, but they had never encountered anything like this. For days, they had been receiving strange signals from deep space. The messages were odd and confusing, almost like a puzzle that needed to be solved. The Xalor's leaders debated what to do. They had encountered unknown signals before, but this one was different. It carried a sense of urgency, a kind of mystery that both fascinated and unsettled them. It was like a whisper from the unknown, a warning or a challenge. And it had one word that stood out above all others: Terran. The word was familiar, but it did not belong in the context of the message. The Terrans, or humans, were a primitive species, barely making their mark on the galaxy. They had no fleet, no advanced weapons, and no technology capable of reaching far beyond their own planet. The Xalor had observed them from afar, but they had never considered them a threat. The idea that humans could send out such a signal, from somewhere beyond their own system, seemed impossible. Still, the message persisted. It repeated over and over, like a pulse from the depths of space. The alien fleet's communication systems crackled with static as the signal grew stronger. The leaders of the Xalor fleet gathered in a vast chamber, their long, slender forms glowing under the light of nearby stars. They exchanged uneasy glances as the signal continued to echo through their ships. There was no mistaking it. The message was coming from a distant location, somewhere far beyond the known territories of any other species. The chief commander of the Xalor fleet, Arvik, stood at the front of the room, his mind racing. He was a leader of great experience, and yet this signal unnerved him. He had never seen anything like it before. His race had encountered countless civilizations across the galaxy, from the peaceful to the aggressive, but never had they faced something so out of place. Arvik's sharp eyes glimmered with curiosity and caution. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We need to investigate this. I want the best engineers, the finest tacticians, and the bravest warriors on this mission. We need to find out where this signal is coming from and why." The fleet's officers sprang into action, relaying orders across the network. Ships began to shift, powering up their engines, and preparing for a journey into the unknown. The Xalor's advanced ships were capable of traveling across vast distances in mere moments. Still, the journey ahead would not be simple. No one knew what they would find. As the fleet moved closer to the source of the signal, Arvik stood by the communications console, staring at the star map. His mind raced with possibilities. What could it mean? Why would a Terran warship be so far from their own system? And who would send out such a strange signal? One that seemed almost desperate. It didn't make sense. The Terrans weren't known for their spacefaring abilities. The Xalor had never seen a human ship outside of their home world, let alone a warship. The thought of humans sending such a message made Arvik uneasy. He knew that humanity, despite its primitive beginnings, had a strange ability to survive and adapt. They had faced countless challenges on their home planet, often coming out stronger. But could they really have developed something that powerful, something capable of reaching beyond their own system? The thought alone seemed absurd. The alien ships moved silently through the blackness of space, their engines humming with power. The signal grew louder as they drew closer. It was coming from a system on the edge of known space, a place rarely explored. The stars there were dim, the planets barren, with little of interest to most explorers. But now, something was different. The signal was leading them to a large, empty region of space, a place where no one had ever dared venture. Arvik's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of one of his officers. "Commander, we're approaching the source of the signal. It's just ahead." The officer's voice was calm, but there was an edge of tension in it. Even the Xalor, who had faced many unknowns, could not shake the feeling that something was off about this entire mission. Maintain course, Arvik ordered, his voice steady. We will see this through. As they approached the coordinates, the fleet slowed down, carefully navigating the empty space. The tension on board was palpable. The Xalar officers exchanged nervous glances, whispering among themselves about the possible danger they might be walking into. What if it was a trap? What if the Terrans had somehow lured them into a deadly situation? But no one spoke these words aloud. No one wanted to voice their fear. The fleet continued on, determined to uncover the truth. Suddenly, the communications officer spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. Commander, we've detected something. A massive object is just ahead. It's a ship. Arvik's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could this be the Terran warship they had been searching for? He quickly ordered the fleet to prepare for any potential conflict, though his mind raced with questions. What kind of ship could it be? How could it have traveled so far, across such vast distances, without detection? The mystery was deepening with each passing moment. The fleet drew closer, and through the dark void of space, the shape of the ship began to emerge. It was unlike anything the Xalar had ever seen. The structure of the ship was massive, ancient-looking, yet somehow intact. Its hull was dark, as though it had been in the depths of space for centuries. But there was no mistaking it. It was a warship. The Xalar fleet hovered in awe. No one moved. No one spoke. The ship loomed before them, a silent enigma in the dark reaches of space. And all the while, the signal continued to pulse, its source now closer than ever. Arvik stared at the ship, his mind racing. The question that haunted him now was not if the Terrans had sent this ship, but how. How had they come to possess such a powerful vessel? And what were they planning next? The mystery of the Terran warship was just beginning. And for the Xalar, there was no turning back now. Unseen force. The alien fleet drifted silently in the dark expanse of space, its ships spread out in a perfect formation, their engines humming quietly. The eerie quietness of the moment contrasted sharply with the rising tension among the Xalar crew. They were close, too close. The Terran warship, now fully visible against the backdrop of distant stars, was enormous, its shape like nothing the Xalar had ever encountered. Commander Arvik stood at the forefront of the command room, his sharp, glowing eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. The warship was still far enough that it didn't seem threatening, but the longer he stared at it, the more unsettling it became. There was something almost ancient about it. The ship was large and imposing, with worn metal plating and markings that suggested it had been through many battles. Yet, despite its battered appearance, there was a strange sense of power radiating from it. The Xalar ships had been designed for speed, for agility, for overwhelming force. They were sleek, their weapons fast and deadly. But the Terran warship was different. It was built like a fortress, heavy and slow, but with an undeniable presence. There was no doubt now. The Terrans had somehow managed to construct something far beyond their known abilities. Report, Arvik said, his voice cold, demanding. The communications officer, a young Xalar with a nervous demeanor, hesitated before speaking. Commander, we've tried to scan the warship, but the readings are strange. It's as though our sensors can't get a clear reading on its systems. The ship seems to be blocking us. Arvik's expression tightened. So they're hiding their true capabilities. Interesting. The officers around him exchanged worried glances. The Xalar were known for their advanced technology, but this was something new, something they had never faced before. The idea that a primitive species like the Terrans could create a ship capable of fooling their sensors made them uneasy. The Terran warship wasn't just advanced, it was a mystery that defied explanation. Initiate passage scans, Arvik ordered. We'll try to approach it without alerting them. Perhaps we can learn more about this ship without provoking it. The Xalar fleet moved forward cautiously, their ships emitting only the faintest hum, carefully avoiding any sudden movements that might alert the Terrans to their presence. The eerie silence of space stretched around them as they inched closer to the warship. At that moment, the silence was shattered. A sudden burst of light appeared from the warship's side, and before anyone could react, the fleet's sensors blared a warning. A blast of energy shot out from the Terran vessel, slicing through space at incredible speed. It struck one of the Xalar ships dead on. The Xalar ship exploded into a brilliant flash of light, its energy shields failing instantly under the force of the blast. The ship was torn apart in an instant, debris scattering into the void. It was an unexpected strike, quick and brutal. The fleet was caught off guard. The Terrans hadn't even responded to their attempts at communication. They had simply attacked. Arvik's mind raced. What is this madness? He muttered under his breath. The Terrans are not known for such reckless aggression. "Commander," shouted the officer at the weapons console. "We're under attack. The Terran warship is firing again." Before Arvik could issue an order, another volley of blasts shot out from the warship, this time hitting two more Xalar ships. Their shields buckled and flickered, but they held for now. However, the alien fleet was no longer moving in unison. Panic spread like wildfire. The communications officer spoke again, his voice trembling. "We've received a transmission from the Terran warship, Commander. It's in their language, but it's a warning." The message crackled through the speakers, distorted but clear enough to make out. "This is a Terran warship. Turn back now, or we will consider you a threat. Humanity does not tolerate invaders." The Xalar were stunned. The humans were threatening them, with a ship that was older than anything the Xalar had ever seen. Arvik could hardly believe it. The Terran message was clear: leave or face destruction. It was unlike anything the Xalar had encountered before. The Terrans, despite being so young and relatively primitive, had created a weapon capable of challenging the might of a highly advanced race. What kind of beings could craft such a force? And why were they so quick to defend their space? Arvik clenched his fists, a surge of anger rising in him. He had led countless campaigns across the galaxy, defeating enemy fleets far larger than this. But this was different. The Terrans had made their stand. The challenge was not just to their technology, but to their pride. "We cannot retreat," Arvik finally said, his voice cold. "Prepare the fleet for a counterattack. We will show these Terrans that they are not the only ones who can fight." The alien fleet turned, preparing for battle. But something in the back of Arvik's mind nagged at him. He knew the Xalar were stronger, faster, and more advanced. Their weapons were superior. Yet the Terran warship had already demonstrated its devastating power. And there was something about it. The way it moved, the way it responded, something about its unpredictability that made Arvik hesitate. It was as if the humans didn't follow the same rules of war as everyone else. They'd fought not with just their technology, but with their very will. "Commander," the officer said, her voice urgent, "we're detecting something else. The Terran warship, it's moving. It's heading towards us. They're coming straight for us." Arvik's heart raced. The Terran warship was charging. The Xalar fleet's weapon systems powered up in response. Tension filled the air. The stage was set for a battle the Xalar never expected, a battle against an enemy that was anything but predictable. The Terran warship was an enigma. It had fired first, without hesitation. It had warned them, and now it was charging into battle. The Xalar had been known as the most fearsome force in the galaxy, but now, for the first time in their long history, they were facing an unknown enemy that refused to be intimidated. As the two forces drew closer, one thing became clear. This would be a battle like no other. The Xalar were about to learn that underestimating humanity might be their greatest mistake. The first move. The silence of space was shattered by the roaring engines of the two forces as they prepared to collide. The Xalar fleet, sleek and agile, hovered in the vast emptiness, their weapons systems fully powered and ready. Their ships were finely tuned for speed and precision. each one capable of launching a devastating strike from a distance. But facing them, coming straight toward them with unwavering intent, was the Terran warship. It was massive and slow, yet there was a sense of inevitability in its movements, as if it had all the time in the universe, and none of the fear that the Xalar had come to expect from their enemies. Arvik stood in the command room, his face a mask of calm determination. His mind raced, calculating the movements of the Terran ship. The Xalar had never faced an enemy that fought in such a way. Most adversaries, even those with superior weapons, would have retreated or at least attempted to outmaneuver the fleet. But the Terrans, these strange, unpredictable humans, were charging straight at them, as if they had no concept of fear. "Commander," said his weapons officer, her voice steady but tinged with tension, "the Terran ship is closing in. They're preparing to fire again." Arvik's fingers clenched around the armrest of his command chair. "Keep your distance," he ordered. "I want full shields up. Fire at will once we're in range." The Xalar fleet spread out, attempting to encircle the Terran warship. Their weapons were fully charged, their systems ready to unleash a torrent of destructive energy. The Terran warship, however, did not attempt to escape. It did not try to dodge or evade. Instead, it held its course, moving forward with a quiet, menacing force. The first volley came from the Xalar fleet. A barrage of energy blasts shot through space, streaking toward the Terran warship. For a moment, it seemed as if the Xalar would easily overwhelm the seemingly unprepared humans. But then, something incredible happened. The Terran warship's shields flared to life, just as the first blast struck. The energy seemed to absorb into the ship's protective field, but instead of faltering, the ship's shields expanded and pulsed with a low hum. The blasts didn't destroy the ship, they barely even slowed it down. "Impossible," one of the officers shouted. "Their shields are holding." "Focus fire," Arvik commanded. "Don't let them get any closer." Another volley erupted from the Xalar ships, this time targeting the warship's engines. Yet again, the Terran vessel's shields flared bright, and once more, the blasts seemed to have little effect. The warship kept coming, relentless, as if every attack only strengthened its resolve. "Commander," a voice called from the communications console, "we're receiving another transmission from the Terrans. It's a direct message, but it's in their language again. The message is..." "Play it," Arvik barked. The ship's speakers crackled to life, and once more, the deep, steady voice of the Terran commander echoed through the bridge. "This is Terran Command. We do not wish for war, but we will not back down. Turn away now, or face the full force of humanity." Arvik's jaw tightened. The audacity of the Terrans was infuriating. To threaten the mighty Xalar with such words, in such a direct manner, was almost laughable. But there was something in the tone of the message, something in the calm, unwavering confidence that made Arvik's skin crawl. It was not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them. The humans weren't bluffing. They were prepared to fight, no matter what the cost. "Steady yourself," Arvik muttered under his breath. "We'll show them what happens when you challenge the might of the Xalar." The Terran warship continued to advance, and now the Xalar fleet was within range. The moment of truth had arrived. Arvik's orders were clear: full offensive. A second barrage of energy blasted toward the Terran warship, but this time the Xalar added their heavy artillery, massive, devastating missiles designed to tear apart even the strongest of ships. The warship's shields were hit with the full force of the attack, but instead of buckling, the shields began to shimmer and pulse in an unpredictable manner. A strange sound filled the command room, a low, resonating hum, as though the very fabric of space was bending. The Terran warship didn't flinch. In fact, it seemed to be waiting. It was as though the ship was drawing energy from the surrounding space itself. The tension grew unbearable. The Xalar ships continued their relentless assault, but the warship remained unyielding, a strange calm emanating from its massive form. Then, without warning, the Terran ship struck back. The energy from the warship's weapons was unlike anything the Xalor had ever seen. It was not the sleek, rapid-fire bursts they were accustomed to. No, the Terran warship unleashed an enormous pulse, a wave of energy so powerful that it caused the very fabric of space to tremble. The blast moved through the Xalor fleet like a shockwave, its intensity rippling through space. The first ship in the Xalor fleet, the one closest to the Terran warship, was hit directly. The ship's shields flared violently, struggling to contain the blast, but they couldn't hold. The energy pulse tore through the ship, shattering it into pieces in an instant. Debris scattered across space, and the ship's remains drifted slowly, lifelessly, into the void. "Shields failing," cried the weapons officer, panic rising in her voice. "We've lost one ship, and the others are taking damage. The Terran warship, it's too powerful." Arvik's eyes narrowed. He had seen many things in his life, battles fought across countless worlds. But this was something new. The Terrans were not just surviving. They were thriving in battle. It was as though every attack only made them stronger, every strike only made them more determined. And then, as the warship loomed ever closer, the truth began to dawn on Arvik. It wasn't the Terran ship's technology that made it powerful. It was the humans themselves. Their resolve, their unyielding will to fight, to survive. They were not just defending their home. They were sending a message. "Retreat," Arvik shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "Fall back. All ships, fall back." But the Terran warship wasn't done. As the Xalor ships began to scatter, the Terran ship pursued, its weapons firing relentlessly. The Terran commander, with an almost eerie precision, aimed for the ships trying to flee, keeping them in his sights with deadly accuracy. The first true test of the Xalor had turned into something far worse, a humbling defeat. The humans were not just another obstacle. They were a force of nature. And now, the Xalor would have to reckon with the full might of humanity. Terran battle tactics. The Xalor fleet was in disarray. Ships scattered, some retreating, others trying to regroup in desperate attempts to escape the unrelenting onslaught of the Terran warship. Commander Arvik, for the first time in his life, was unsure. His fleet, which had crushed countless enemies, was now facing an enemy that didn't follow the same rules of war. The Terrans were unlike any foe the Xalor had ever encountered, and Arvik's mind was scrambling to adapt. "Commander," said his chief strategist, a seasoned officer named Lethar, "we cannot continue like this. The Terran ship is unpredictable. Its weapons are stronger than anything we've encountered, and it is relentless. If we don't find a way to neutralize it soon, we'll lose the entire fleet." Arvik stood silently for a moment, watching the battle unfold. The Terran warship, with its unconventional tactics and strange resilience, was unlike anything that Xalor had faced. It was as if the humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting with everything they had. Arvik had seen battles before where one side had superior technology or numbers, but the Terran warship was something different. It was alive with purpose, charging at the Xalor with a ferocity that even the most battle-hardened commanders would hesitate to match. "What do you suggest, Lethar?" Arvik finally asked, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. Lethar's eyes glinted with intensity. "We need to adjust our approach. The Terran ship has already shown that it can absorb our attacks. Its shields are unlike anything we've ever seen, but they're not invulnerable. They've been faltering with each strike. The key is to break through their defense, to overload the shields with sustained fire and precision strikes." Arvik nodded slowly. "And the warship's weapons? We can't ignore that." Lethar's expression hardened. "No, we must stay out of its line of fire. But our fleets are faster. We can move faster than they can aim. We can launch a concentrated attack on their weak points, avoid the direct blasts, and hit them where they're most vulnerable." Arvik studied the star map, his sharp mind calculating the risks. He knew Lethar was right. The Terrans were unpredictable. But they were not invincible. Their warship had to have weaknesses. There was always a way to defeat even the strongest enemy, no matter how much it might seem like they were on the edge of victory. "Very well," Arvik said. "Prepare the fleet for an all-out offensive. We'll target the ship's energy conduits. Lethar, I want you to identify their weak points. We'll use the speed of our ships to outmaneuver them and keep them off balance. Focus on the smaller, more vulnerable sections." Lethar's eyes narrowed. "Understood, Commander." The Zeller fleet, now reorganized and ready, began its new offensive. The ships moved like shadows, darting in and out of the Terran warship's field of vision, launching rapid strikes. The Terrans, though highly skilled, were not prepared for this new strategy. As the settler ships darted in, they unleashed volleys of precision blasts aimed directly at the warship's energy systems. The Terran warship, though massive and sturdy, was not built to absorb such sustained, focused attacks. The energy shields of the Terran ship flickered, showing signs of strain under the Xalar fleet's concentrated fire. For the first time, the warship seemed to slow, its movements less fluid, as though the barrage was causing a crack in its otherwise perfect defenses. The Xalar fleet pressed harder, determined to break through. Arvik's strategy was simple. The faster ships would move in to strike, retreat just as quickly, and then strike again, overwhelming the warship with quick, targeted bursts. But even as the Xalar fleet pressed forward, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The Terran warship wasn't reacting as expected. Instead of trying to shield itself or retreat, the warship seemed to be growing more dangerous. It wasn't just absorbing the damage, it was learning. The warship's movements were shifting, adapting to every tactic the Xalor threw at it. "Commander," the communications officer said urgently, "we're detecting strange fluctuations in their weapon systems. They're recalibrating. It's as if they've learned how to counter our attacks in real time." Arvik's jaw tightened. "They're adapting. They're predicting our moves." Indeed, the Terran warship's fire began to grow more precise, more deadly. Each blast seemed to land exactly where the Xalar ships had been, forcing the fleet to change tactics again and again. The warship wasn't just absorbing the damage. It was adapting to it, predicting the fleet's movements like a player moving pieces on a chessboard. "Shields are weakening," one of the officers called out. "We've lost one of our forward ships." The Xalar fleet had already lost several ships, and now the warship's weapons seemed to be finding the holes in their shields. The fleet was struggling to maintain its balance. What had seemed like a promising strategy was now falling apart under the relentless counterattack of the Terrans. "Commander, their firepower is becoming overwhelming," Lethar shouted, as his screens flickered with warnings. "We need to adapt again, or we risk losing the entire fleet." Arvik took a deep breath. This was not how he had envisioned this battle. The Terrans weren't like the other enemies he had faced. They weren't just responding to his tactics, they were dictating the flow of the battle. They were forcing the Xalor to rethink everything. And then it hit him. "The humans don't think like we do," Arvik muttered. "They don't fight with just technology. They fight with their minds, their will. They're relentless because they have nothing to lose." Lethar glanced at him, confused. "What do you mean, Commander?" "They're not just trying to win the battle," Arvik said, his voice low, almost to himself. "They're trying to survive. Their very existence is at stake. And that is the most dangerous kind of enemy." A shiver ran down Arvik's spine as he realized the true nature of his foe. The Terrans weren't just defending their ship, they were defending their entire species. The Xalar fleet was facing an enemy with an unshakable resolve, and in that resolve, the Terrans were becoming something more than just soldiers. They were a force of nature. Arvik's thoughts were interrupted by the voice of his tactical officer. "Commander, we've detected a new pattern in the Terran ship's movements. It's unlike anything we've seen before." Arvik stood tall. "Prepare the fleet for one final assault. We'll use their own tactics against them." It's time we learned how to fight like humans. As the sailor fleet reeled from the shock of the Terran counterattack, Arvik knew the true test was just beginning. To defeat humanity, they would have to adapt in ways they never thought possible. The Terran crew. The sailor fleet, battered but not broken, hovered at a distance, regrouping and recalibrating their systems. The Terran warship, a massive and relentless juggernaut, remained at the center of the battle, its weapons still charging, ready to strike again at any moment. Arvik's mind raced as he watched the ongoing conflict unfold. Every move he made, every tactic he deployed, seemed to be met with a response from the Terrans that was both unexpected and terrifyingly effective. But amidst the chaos of the battle, Arvik couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this conflict than just ships and weapons. There was a strange pull in the air, a sense of something greater than just a fight for dominance. The Terran warship was powerful, yes, but its true strength wasn't in its technology or its weapons. It was in its crew. "Commander," said Lether, his voice a mix of awe and uncertainty, "we've intercepted another transmission from the Terran warship. It's a signal. This time, it's not a warning. It's a communication to their crew." Arvik turned toward his strategist. "What's the message?" Lether hesitated before replying. "It's in their language, Commander, but it's more than just words. There's a kind of energy to it. It's like a rallying cry. They're preparing their crew for something. I think they're ready to push forward. They're not backing down." Arvik's eyes narrowed. The Terrans were preparing for something. The battle had been brutal, and they had already lost so many of their ships. Yet they were not retreating. They were rallying. He realized that the Terran crew wasn't simply following orders. They were driven by something far deeper, something more primal than just tactics and technology. The Zeller fleet had been conditioned to see their soldiers as the pinnacle of strength, their tactics as the most sophisticated in the galaxy. But now, for the first time, Arvik was forced to confront the idea that the Terrans, with their primitive nature, had something else. Their determination, their will to fight to the bitter end, no matter the odds. The communication continued, and Arvik could hear the faint sound of human voices in the transmission, though distorted by static. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable. It was one of unity, one of purpose, one of unwavering resolve. The Terrans were preparing their crew not just for a fight, but for a survival, an instinctual drive to protect everything they held dear. "Commander," Lether said, a note of realization in his voice, "this warship, it's not just a machine. It's a symbol. It's a testament to their crew's willpower. We're not facing soldiers. We're facing people who believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that they will win. Their crew is unified in a way we've never seen before." Arvik felt the weight of those words settle heavily on his shoulders. The Terran crew wasn't just following orders. They were fighting for something far more important than just victory. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and their very existence. For the first time, Arvik felt a flicker of doubt. The sailor had fought countless battles, but never had they faced an enemy so unyielding, so determined. "Give me more details on their crew," Arvik demanded. "Who are they? What makes them so different?" Lether began to work quickly, analyzing the signals and trying to piece together any data on the Terran warship's crew. His fingers danced over the holographic console as he accessed every bit of information they had on the Terrans. "It's strange," Lether said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "The ship's crew, it's composed of just a few hundred humans, but the coordination between them, it's flawless. There's no chaos, no hesitation. They move as one, as if they've been fighting together for a lifetime." Arvik's mind raced. A crew of just a few hundred, and yet they had the precision and cohesion of a force 10 times their size. It was as though the Terrans had no fear, no hesitation. Their unity, their belief in their cause, it made them stronger than any weapon, more dangerous than any ship. "How is this possible?" Arvik muttered, half to himself. They should have collapsed by now. They should have broken under the weight of this battle. Lethar looked at the display with a mixture of respect and disbelief. Maybe it's not about the ship. Maybe it's about the people inside it. The words struck Arvik like a lightning bolt. For all his years of experience, for all his victories and conquests, he had never once considered that the strength of a battle might not lie solely in the technology or the firepower. The Terrans fought with something more, a relentless, unshakable will. Prepare to launch another attack, Arvik ordered, though he knew deep down that this wasn't just about tactics anymore. The Terrans were fighting for survival, and they would not give up easily. But we need to learn more about them. These people, they are different, and I need to understand why. The Xalar fleet reorganized, their ships moving into position once again. But this time, there was a different air to the battle. Arvik knew that the Xalar's usual superiority in technology would not win this fight. He had to find a way to break the Terran spirit, to understand what made them tick. But as the Terran warship loomed ahead, its weapons charged and its crew ready, Arvik had an unsettling realization. The true battle was not just against the ship or its technology. It was against the humans themselves. And for the first time, the Xalar were beginning to question if they had underestimated the one thing they could never hope to defeat, the power of human will. Inside the Terran warship, a different story was unfolding. The crew, far from being intimidated or demoralized, was focused entirely on the task at hand. Every officer, every crew member knew that their lives and the future of their species depended on their success. They fought not just as soldiers, but as human beings with something to protect, something worth fighting for. The Xalar would soon learn that underestimating the strength of humanity's resolve might just be their most dangerous mistake. Humanity's hidden strength. The battle had stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. The once imposing Xalar fleet had been battered by wave after wave of Terran counterattacks. Despite their technological superiority, despite their fleet's overwhelming size, they were struggling. The Terran warship, though seemingly outdated compared to the sleek, advanced ships of the Xalar, had proven to be more than a match. And now, Arvik could no longer ignore the truth that was slowly dawning on him. The true power of the Terran warship wasn't in its weapons or its shields. It was in its crew. It was in the people inside the ship, those who fought not because they were trained to, but because they had to. The Xalar were discovering, far too late, that their greatest mistake was not understanding what made humanity unique. Arvik stood on the command deck of his flagship, watching as yet another of his ships was torn apart by a precise strike from the Terran warship. Despite their best efforts to regroup and form new strategies, the Xalar fleet was being systematically picked apart. There was no chaos aboard the Terran ship. There was no panic, just a singular, focused will to survive. "Commander," Lethar's voice broke through Arvik's thoughts. "We've intercepted another communication from the Terran warship. This time, it's different. It's not just a transmission. It's a broadcast to their entire fleet. It's a call to action." The words were barely out of Lethar's mouth when the transmission was broadcast across the fleet. The voice that came through was calm but forceful, the tone one of unwavering conviction. It was a human voice. "We are Terrans, and we fight not for power, not for conquest, but for survival. We fight because our world has taught us that only those who refuse to give up, no matter the cost, will survive. We will not bow. We will not surrender. The Xalar may have power, but they do not have what we have. The strength to face anything, no matter how impossible. This is our battle, and we will win it." The words sent a chill through the command room. Arvik had heard speeches before, grand declarations of victory, boasts of superiority. But there was something in the human voice, something raw and primal, that was different. It wasn't just a speech. It wasn't just bravado. It was a promise that no matter the odds, no matter the power of their enemy, the Terrans would never stop fighting. Lethar glanced at Arvik, concern etched across his face. This This is something we've never seen before. It's not just about their technology or their warship. It's about them. Their entire species is bound together by something we don't understand. Arvik's mind was racing. The Terrans weren't fighting for power or domination. They weren't fighting to conquer or to expand. They were fighting because it was their nature. For the Xalar, war had always been a means to an end, an exercise in power and control. But the Terrans were different. They fought with a relentless will to survive, a force that couldn't be measured by technology or firepower. And that, more than anything else, was what made them so dangerous. "Send a message to the fleet," Arvik said, his voice cold but focused. "We need to disrupt their resolve. We need to break them, not by force, but by understanding. These humans, they fight like animals defending their pack. They fight like families fighting for survival. We need to find a way to fracture that unity." Lether hesitated for a moment, then nodded, understanding the implications of the command. The Xalar were skilled at dismantling enemies, but breaking the spirit of a species that fought with such fierce unity, that would require something different. As the fleet reorganized and prepared for another strike, Arvik's thoughts turned inward. The Terran will to survive, to keep pushing even when it seemed impossible, was something that the Xalar had never truly encountered. Their wars had been fought to secure resources, to expand their power, to dominate weaker species. But the Terrans, they fought to protect everything they held dear, every life, every family, every home. It wasn't just a fight for victory, it was a fight for existence. Meanwhile, aboard the Terran warship, the crew was gathering in the command center. Despite the destruction outside, despite the enormous damage the ship had sustained, there was no fear among them. There was no doubt. The captain, a hardened veteran of many battles, stood in front of his crew, his eyes steely with determination. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice steady but firm. "We've survived longer than anyone thought possible. The Xalar thought they could break us, thought they could crush us. But they've learned one thing. We don't stop. We don't quit. We fight for each other. We fight for our families. And most importantly, we fight for our future." The crew nodded in unison. There was no need for further words. They knew what they had to do. They had been through hardships before. Humans had faced wars, famine, and disaster for centuries. But they had always emerged stronger, more united. The Terrans had faced the impossible time and again, and every time, they had survived. It was that tenacity, that unshakable spirit, that made them more dangerous than any fleet of warships. Captain Reynolds turned to the helmsman. "Set a course for their flagship. We're going to make them understand what humanity is capable of. We'll show them that we don't need their technology to defeat them. We need nothing but each other." The crew set to work with precision, each member moving as if they were a single organism, their actions synchronized by their shared purpose. It was the kind of unity that only a people who had faced extinction and survived could achieve. Back in the Xalar command room, Arvik watched in disbelief as the Terran warship began to shift course, heading directly toward the heart of the Xalar fleet. The humans weren't retreating. They weren't surrendering. They were charging in, as if they welcomed the fight, as if they were driven by something far deeper than just the need to win. They were fighting for survival, for their future. The Xalar, for all their technology, for all their power, had never faced an enemy like this. They had underestimated humanity, assuming that their technology would win the day. But now, they were facing something they had never predicted, a species that fought with everything they had, with a resolve that couldn't be shattered. Arvik watched the Terran warship close in on their fleet, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if the Xalar were truly ready for this fight. The Terrans were not just warriors. They were survivors, and that might just be enough to change the course of this battle forever. The final confrontation. The silence before the storm was suffocating. The Xalar fleet, now fully aware of the strength and unity of the Terran warship and its crew, found themselves at the edge of uncertainty. They had underestimated the Terrans, assuming their advanced technology would carry them to victory. But now, the tables had turned. The battle was no longer about firepower or strategic maneuvering. It had become something deeper, more visceral. It was a fight of will. The Terran warship, battered but unbroken, moved toward the heart of the Xalar fleet. Every weapon, every shield, every engine was strained to the limit, but the humans aboard were relentless. They didn't retreat. They didn't falter. They didn't even hesitate. The humans were charging into the jaws of certain death, and in doing so, they had already won. They had proven that their strength lay not in their ships, but in their spirit, in their collective resolve to survive at all costs. Inside the Xalar command ship, Arvik paced back and forth. The urgency of the situation was palpable. His fleet, once dominant, was now scattered and weakened, fighting an enemy that wasn't just willing to die for their cause. They were willing to win. The message the Terrans had sent out in their last transmission, the one that had sparked a moment of reflection in Arvik's mind, echoed in his thoughts. They fight for survival. Arvik muttered under his breath. They fight for something beyond us, something we can't even comprehend. Lethar, standing beside him, spoke softly, almost reluctantly. Commander, the Terran warship is headed straight for us. We've tried everything. We can't break their resolve. Their crew is unyielding. They've taken on everything we've thrown at them, and they're still coming. Arvik's gaze hardened. Then we make one final strike. We must break them now, before they break us. The Xalar fleet, despite its overwhelming size, was now scattered. Their attacks had become more desperate, more uncoordinated, as the Terran ship surged through their lines. The humans had adapted to every tactic the Xalar had used, and they now had the upper hand. The Terran warship wasn't just surviving. It was hunting, moving with a predatory grace that unnerved the Xalar. It was almost as though the ship itself was driven by something deeper than technology, an instinct, a raw power that couldn't be measured by mere weapons. Meanwhile, aboard the Terran warship, Captain Reynolds stood at the helm, eyes locked on the approaching Xalar ships. He was unshaken, a rock in the storm. Behind him, his crew worked as one, each person focused on their task with the single-minded determination that had carried them this far. Every decision, every move, was made for one purpose: to ensure that humanity would survive this battle, and every battle to come. "We've taken hits," Reynolds said, his voice calm yet commanding. "But we're still here. We've shown them what we're capable of. Now let's finish this, not with our firepower, but with our unity. This war is about more than weapons. It's about the people aboard this ship. It's about us. And we're not going to lose." The crew responded with a collective shout of agreement. Their unity was their greatest weapon. And now, as they moved into the final stages of battle, they were ready to push forward, no matter the cost. The Xalar fleet, in all its might, was facing an enemy that did not fear death, did not fear defeat. The Terrans were already victorious in their hearts. As the Terran warship bore down on the Xalar flagship, the final confrontation seemed inevitable. The Xalar fleet, desperate to stave off defeat, opened fire with everything they had left. Blasts of energy and missiles filled the space between them, but the Terran warship moved with eerie precision, dodging and countering every attack with a calm confidence. The humans had learned their enemies' patterns, and now they were using that knowledge to their advantage. For the first time, the Xalar were on the defensive. The Terran warship had breached their lines and was now charging directly at the flagship. The energy from the Xalar weapons crackled through the void, but the Terran ship absorbed the attacks with remarkable efficiency. Every strike, every missile, only seemed to strengthen the Terrans' resolve. Arvik watched, helpless, as the gap between the two ships closed. He had thought his fleet was invincible. He had thought his strategy would work. But now, as the Terran warship closed in, he realized how wrong he had been. The Xalar were losing, not because of their technology, but because they had misunderstood their enemy. As the Terran warship launched its final assault, a massive blast tore through the Xalar flagship's shields, breaking through to its core. The flagship shuddered, its systems faltering. Alarms blared as the ship's energy reserves began to collapse, and the Xalar crew scrambled to regain control. But it was too late. The Terran warship had breached the heart of the flagship. On the command deck, Arvik stood frozen, watching the screen as the Xalar flagship began to break apart. The battle was over. The Terrans had won. "Commander," Lether said quietly, "it's over. The Terrans have. They've defeated us." Arvik's eyes hardened, but there was no anger in his gaze, only respect. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't defeat us. They survived us. And that is what makes them the most dangerous force in the galaxy." The Xalar fleet began to retreat, their pride shattered, their confidence broken. For the first time in their history, they had met an enemy that they couldn't conquer. And that enemy had been humanity. As the Terran warship, battered but unbroken, drifted victorious among the stars, Captain Reynolds gazed out at the remnants of the Xalar fleet. They had won, not because of their technology, not because of superior firepower, but because they had something the Xalar could never hope to understand: the unbreakable spirit of humanity. "We've made our mark," Reynolds said quietly, turning to face his crew. "And now, the galaxy knows what humanity is capable of." The Terran warship turned, its engines powering up for the journey back. The fight was over, but the message had been sent. Humanity had proven that they were not to be underestimated, and the Xalar, for all their power, would never forget the day they learned the true meaning of survival. As the warship vanished into the dark expanse of space, the Terran crew knew this was only the beginning. They had faced the impossible and had come out victorious. And as long as they had each other, there was no enemy in the galaxy they couldn't defeat.